And good evening, everybody. Welcome to Photography Live and Uncut. My name's Paul Griffiths, and my guest this evening, all the way from Oregon, Mason Marsh. Welcome to my show, Mason.
It's great to be here, Paul. What a pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed. It's super that I've got another master from the Arcanum on my show, and that's where we're going to kick off the show, first of all, to talk about this magical mystery tour that we're all on, basically, the learning experience of photography. Which we're going to talk great. I just looks like we're all good for signals. We're not going to get any interruptions. Fingers crossed. So here we go. Mason, let's really start off. I first came across you when I started seeing you appearing on the programs with the wars and that sort of thing in the Arcanum. Let's start talking about the Arcanum. To you, what is the Arcanum?
You know, it's an evolving experience, that's for sure. But the best way I can describe it right now, my elevator pitch, if you will, is that it's CrossFit for photographers. And I don't know if you're familiar with CrossFit. It's a big craze here in the United States with fitness. And instead of going to a regular gym and working out by yourself and hating every minute of it, you go into a more unconventional space and you work out with a group of people that you probably work out with every day or every couple of days. And you have a trainer that's there that watches you work out, helps keep you sort of doing the right things and the right techniques, and gives you tips, but isn't there to tell you how to do things. You know, it's really about repetition and about practice. And I think that's a good analogy for the Arcanum. Each cohort of apprentices works under a master, but the master is not there to teach. And I think this is something that's a big misconception. There are certainly educational moments, and masters can lend a lot of experience and a lot of expertise to certain topics. But I think the core of the learning in the Arcanum is in the doing of making photographs. And I'll tell you, Paul, I have loved music my whole life. I cannot play a single instrument, but I could listen to music all day and tell you what those instruments are. I'm a great appreciator of music, but if I pick up a guitar, I'm going to look like a fool. And I think that photography, a lot of times people that go and take a lot of photography classes and do a lot of photography, read a lot of books and go to trainings and things like that, if they aren't actually going out and taking photos, they're not really photographers. They're appreciators of photography. And the Arcanum requires that people produce a lot. And in my cohorts, it's all about the work. It's about getting those shots in. It's less of a social network and more of a workout, right? And I go back to that CrossFit thing. I'm there as sort of the personal trainer saying, I'm standing there with my cup of coffee going, get to work, do good work. And I think that there's a lot of great things that come from people sharing photography with each other. Everybody in my cohorts comes from a different place, comes from a different geographic, economic, social space, and they also have very different interests in what they do. I run general photography cohorts, so I have landscape photographers and portrait people, street photographers, and macro photographers, all kinds of different people who, when they look at each other's work, they have different perspectives. And when they share their feedback, that's where the magic happens. And you don't get that on Flickr or 500 Pics or any of those other places where you can go and share your work. You don't have a dedicated core of other photographers who are going to do the same and give back to you. And I think that's the magic of the Arcanum.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said there. And I think also another thing to add to it, if you go on the what I would term the one-off workshop, where it's a day or 3 or 5 or longer days, you're sort of in a cocoon, but you're held in that mode for that moment. Where the Arcanum, it's not that, is it? It's a lengthy process. You know, when you start off in the foundation course, you have your levels to go through, and everything is set for you by the master. Then you move on to the next sphere and onward, and it is a continuance of learning, of guidance, and worthwhile comment and critique by not only yourself as the master, which for those that are watching will probably not realize, but every fifth level you have a critique session with the master. And of course, but in between that time, you're getting regular comment and contact with your fellow members of that cohort. And a lot of the cohorts, as you know, Mason, have their own hangout chat lines, and of course they're chatting away. Good morning, how's things? It's a great contact, and you talk about a community which is worldwide. I'm in Sphere 2 with Jessica Lark. We got people in Scotland, London, Ireland, America, Australia. It's just amazing. And it is really a great way of learning. I think one of the fears, this is one thing we were talking about pre-show. I think one of the fears is when they look at it, the new viewer, they say, oh, the Arcanum, they immediately think it's a pyramid cell. That dreaded word, which we don't like to say. Can I ask your views on that, this view of the pyramid cell?
It's really sad to me to hear people say that, because if it were a pyramid scheme, I would be decked out. I would be wearing gold chains right now. I'd be doing pretty well. But it's unfortunately, because of the way we have marketed the Arcanum, and I think a lot of this goes back to sort of Trey's personality, Trey Ratcliffe, who started the whole thing. His personality is very free-flowing, very easygoing. He's very much a Zen kind of guy. And that's not an act. I mean, that's how he handles his business. It's like, he's very loose. He's like, let you decide what you think of my work, and let you decide what you think of this. And when they marketed the Arcanum, they set it up with a lot of this language around mastery and magic and apprentices and masters. And there's this sort of gamerish fantasy hybrid language that came into the marketing. And when I got involved with the Arcanum, I was like, I don't want to have anything to do with, I'm not a gamer. I don't play role-playing games. I don't dress up and swashbuckle at the park or do anything like that. And so when I got into it, I said, it's got to be an educational experience. It's about the photography. And at the core of the Arcanum, the core mission, which is not promoted enough, is that we are there to level up people's skills in a community that is dedicated to learning, dedicated to vulnerability, humility, and a common experience. And to me, that message needs to come through, because when it does, when apprentices like you come out and say, hey, here's what I've gotten from this experience. I haven't heard anybody say, oh yeah, I'm just in it so I could get to the next level and unlock this amazing thing that's going to happen. And Trey's going to come out of the clouds and bless me with, HDR sense or something, crazy. Yeah. And the truth is every step of the way, it's about making your skills better, about making your passion deeper for photography, expanding your vision, your creative vision, by working with other photographers. You cannot, I firmly believe this, you cannot really find yourself as a photographer until you bounce yourself off of a bunch of other photographers.
Yeah, quite right.
And if you're on an island and you think you're the best photographer on that island and you're the only photographer on that island, then you're right. But you're also the worst photographer on that island. Yeah. But we don't live on an island, right? And so when this back to your question about the pyramid scheme, because the Arcanum is a business and the masters are paid, and just so everybody knows, the masters work on a revenue share with the Arcanum. And so we split the income 50-50. And every dollar that's paid in, half of that goes to the masters so that they can be involved and they can treat this as a job. And for a lot of us, this is what we do. There are some masters out there who are working photographers, but most of us come from more of an education photography blend, and this is what we do. And your experience with A.D. Wheeler and with Jessica has borne that out. I mean, Jessica and A.D. and I are a lot alike in that we spend most of our time doing this. Arcanum stuff, and we're dedicated to the education. If I was doing it for the money, honestly, I could make a lot more money doing workshops.
Yeah.
But this allows me to work with people over a longer stretch of time. And I want to go back and touch on the workshops thing, because I do one workshop a year now. I'm at home with my kids, and so I don't get to travel as much as I used to, but I do one workshop a year. And I have this small group of people that travel with me for a week or two, and we go to some amazing places. We have a lot of fun. We drink awesome coffee. But when we get done, I always end the trip going, there was so much more I wanted to share with you. Mm-hmm. There was so much more I wanted to say. And if we could only continue this, because learning, it's best when it's not done in a bulk session where you get all this information and you're supposed to digest it like a giant meal. Mm-hmm. And it's better as snacks. And the Arcanum is set up like that. And so the first reason I got involved with the Arcanum is because it answered that need that I had to continue to work with my workshop participants. And a lot of my initial apprentices were workshop participants of mine who wanted more time with me. And
that's a good point you make, actually, which is what I was saying earlier on. You go on a workshop, and it's I've got a little bit of feedback. It's like you're in a cocoon for that period of time. And of course, as I said earlier on, with the Arcanum, it's elongated, as you say. It's the snack. That's another great analogy. Actually, it's like snacking every so often. Let's come back to yourself getting involved with the Arcanum. How did your involvement initially get started, Mason?
It's actually a really funny story. I had read about the Arcanum when they were first discussing it. I've followed Trey and stuff for years. And one of my workshop participants, a great guy named Charlie, who's another fan of Trey's, sent me an email one day saying, "Hey, are you going to do this Arcanum thing when they launch?" I said, well, and he said, "Are you going to be one of the masters they're talking about?" I said, "Well, I'm not on Trey's radar. I'm just a little fish. I don't have a huge following on any social media. I have my dedicated workshop people. I have a small group of people that follow me on YouTube and things like that, but not a big following." And so I said, "Well, I'm not on Trey's radar." About 10 minutes later, he emails me back and says, "You are now." And he had sent a big, long email to Trey talking about how they needed me as one of the masters. Wow. And I got an email from Peter Giordano, who was the CEO of the Arcanum when they started up, one of the 3 founders, saying, "Hey, when we get an email like this, we take note. And this guy said some pretty amazing things about you. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, we've got an initial batch of masters going right now. When we start up the actual processing and training of new masters, do you want to be one of the first?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." And so I was in the first batch of masters to go through the masters training, which is called the fast track at the time.
Yeah.
And I was trained with, did some training with Ron Clifford, who I adore. Mm-hmm. And I went through that as fast as I could, which is about a week. Wow. And got my cohort formed and was off and running. And that was, a year and a half ago now.
It's an amazing story, actually, because something similar happened to us, because my first cohort was with Valerie Jardin. And we started off the foundation, and we're sort of going along quite nicely and talking about it. And all of a sudden, Martin Bailey pops up.
Yeah.
He went, "Hi, guys, I'm on a fast track." And I went, "What's going on?" And we tease Martin quite a lot, poor fella, because Martin is not a street photographer, and Valerie was a street cohort. And he was putting his photographs up of these beautiful birds and the monkeys out in Hokkaido and all this. Yeah. I said, "Martin, I've seen some of his work where he's taken photographs in the fish markets in Tokyo." I said, "Put those up, then we can comment."
Yeah.
He did in the end, but he did get rigged, the poor fella. So yeah, he was also on the fast track as well. But of course, as we know, that's now changed to the path of the protege, which is, I understand, has been put on ice for a little while, which is not a problem. I was just starting mine, and around about 3rd level in, and they put a halt to it because of certain changes. doesn't matter. We'll work that out when it starts again. So you did your foundation course. You obviously started off with your cohort group. You started off with a foundation course. Then you went into the first sphere, sphere 1, and then we hit the lounge, sphere 2, when it all, for me, ground to a halt.
Yes.
And I, in actual fact, was very fortunate to get Curtis Simmons on my show within a number of shows back. And I said to him, I said, what's happened? And a great analogy came out, and he said, the trouble is, Paul, he said, what do? Do you get your cab drivers first or your passengers?
Yeah.
And then the penny dropped, and I knew exactly what was it. How were you finding it then? Because I remember you and Jessica and a few others wanted to move things along, but of course the guys weren't coming into the lounge, were they?
Yes. I told Peter, I'm getting some feedback here. I don't know if you were hearing that, but I told Peter Giordano that I wanted to do Sphere 2 when my people were ready for Sphere 2.
Okay.
And in a hangout, just the two of us, he said, we're going to let you do that. We're going to let you do that. And I built this model because I'm not a big name photographer. I'm not a Jessica Lark or Valerie Jardin. I said, you know what? I've got to build my own Sphere 2 cohort from people who already know me. So I'm going to continue what I was doing in Sphere 1. And I've got a whole bunch of people that say they want to stay with me for Sphere 2.
Yeah.
And so I told Pete I said, if I can get 10 people that commit to me for Sphere 2, will you let me start Sphere 2? And he said, yeah, I think we will, but you gotta hang on. And so all these people went into the lounge with you,
yeah,
and a bunch of other people, and they started the initial 2 cohorts with Ron and Robin.
That's right.
And I told all of the apprentices that I had, I said, you know what? If you don't want to wait for me, that's fine. You can go and study with Ron or Robin. I won't be offended at all. But if you want to stick around, just decline their invitations. And once the dust settles, they're going to let me launch.
Yeah.
And I started getting these messages from Robin and Ron saying, what are you doing? I've got all these people declining our invitations. We didn't think anybody would decline. They said we got 40 people in the lounge, and we're trying to launch Sphere 2, and all these people are declining. I said, well, I'm sorry, but I've actually got a bunch of people that want to stick with me, and they're like, oh, okay. And so that's how I got my Sphere 2, is by force of attrition. I made Peter do it, and I snuck in. I was number 3 to start the cohort, and that. That got me to now. I'm the first to start Sphere 3.
Sphere 3, exactly. Yeah, the first one.
We're a few months into Sphere 3 now, and I'm really enjoying it.
How many people have you got in Sphere 3, Mason?
I've got 11.
Nice number.
Yeah, I really think that as the spheres get higher, this groups should be smaller.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's a much more intense experience. And what I'm doing at Sphere 3 is really different. I am trying to do something. I'm trying to break the mold of the Arcanum. And so,
if you don't mind me interrupting, that's a good segue, because I want to talk about this with regards to how the levels have changed. So if we take the foundation, then Sphere 1 and 2, and then 3, how would you, if you can, simply put, how you develop those spheres through to where you are now?
Okay, that's great. And every master is going to answer this differently, but
of course, yeah.
But for me, the foundation and foundation spheres of 0 and 1 were all about just getting everybody to know each other, know each other's work, and get to know how the Arcanum works.
Yeah.
And I have always had a general photography focus. So it's not a focus, right? Mm-hmm. So I've always invited people of all different types of photography, of genres and interests, and encouraged a mix of this. And I didn't add any extra special sauce, if you will, at the foundation spheres, like a lot of masters did. And my whole thing was, you get through the foundation as fast as you can, and we'll get to Sphere 2, and that's where you start to focus.
Yeah.
And so I started to sort of transition people in the last 4 levels of Sphere 1. We start to do customized challenges. And so what I was doing was I was saying, okay, you are a landscape photographer. I've gotten to know you really well. We've done a couple of critiques together. I've watched you interact with other apprentices now for months or maybe even a year at this point. So I know you really well as a personal trainer, right? To go back to the analogy, I know what they're good at. I know what they need to work on. And so I start hitting them with challenges that start pushing on their weak spots. And when I got to the point where I needed to develop Sphere 2, I said, I'm just going to keep doing that. So my Sphere 2 is completely custom. So the apprentices designed 4 of the levels themselves, and I designed the rest. And we have a hangout, a critique at every level. And so it's much more of a, it's less of a cohort experience, unfortunately, because of each person's doing their own thing, but it's much more focused on what people want to do for projects. And so I've got people who are building websites. I've got people that are taking trips and doing batches of photos from trips, or making books. And then we sit down and look at their project and critique it, and we move on to the next one. And that worked really well. And then when it came time to develop Sphere 3, I said, I'm not going to continue with that model, because if somebody wants to just keep doing projects, they can just repeat Sphere 2.
Exactly right.
Keep doing projects forever if they want. But for Sphere 3, I wanted to take it up a notch and really push people outside of their comfort zones. And so what I've done is I've created a series of challenges that are really unconventional. And each challenge, you produce one image. So you post one shot for each challenge. So no batches of 20 or 10 like we did before. Yeah. And by producing one shot, we're allowing everyone else a chance to focus on the feedback. And so because we're only seeing 11 images across 11 apprentices for each challenge, everybody has to critique each other's images. It's a lot easier to do because there isn't that many to look at.
Exactly right.
So we're seeing, I'm seeing, on some images, 20 comments, 30 comments on an image.
That's brilliant.
Because there's people going back and forth, asking questions and having this conversation. And I think that feedback is critical. The fun thing though, Paul, what's really interesting about my Sphere 3 is I had to go back to him yesterday and say, hey, listen, we got to get better at our feedback. And so the photography is kind of like, yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Right now, I want us to have an experience where everybody who's here is getting what they need out of it. And if we're spending a lot of time giving each other feedback and no one cares about the feedback, then what are we doing?
Exactly.
And so we're really bearing down on, very personal, productive, what I call meaningful feedback. And it's really tough because
if anyone can hear me, I think we just lost the connection with Mason. He's still connected to us. He's back. Sorry, Mason.
Okay. I froze up for a second. I don't know what happened.
Just dropped off. I could just interrupt you there because I wanted to talk about my experience when I was in the lounge. We've got a little carry on talking. When I was in the lounge, I was getting a bit concerned because I'd come from a street cohort, and of course there was, by the look, what I could see, the masters weren't street photographers, and I did, in actual fact. And this is the great thing about the Arcana that I've found: the connectability that you can do. You got a problem, you send an email, you will get an answer, be it Curtis, Trey, or Peter Giordano, as it was at that time. And my impression and my idea was, I'm probably wasting time in the lounge here, and it was touch and go whether I stayed in the Arcanum, and I'm pleased I did. But I suggested, can I go back and do Sphere 1 again, probably doing something different, a different genre, like landscape or some contemporary work of that nature. Macro isn't really of any interest to me. And I got a reply back, oh, we haven't even thought about that. Why don't you just hang on? I said, well, look, there's no street photographer masters in that, ready for Sphere 2 because Valerie had left. So I was really in a quandary what to do. A couple of my friends from the street cohort have moved on and gone to Ron Clifford and have gone to Robin. And I kept on saying, how's things going? Well, it's all right, but it's not what I was wanting. So I, in actual fact, was preparing myself that if I did get an invite, I was going to do the Mason Marsh answer and say, no, not for me, thank you. But then the thing which happened was, which was just totally bowled me over, got an email through on the Hangout chat from Jessica. Anyone interested in joining a cross cohort covering all aspects of photography, please join me in a Hangout. And 9 of us were on there. And she asked me the straight question, what do you want to do, Paul? In 5 years' time, what do you want to be? So I said, well, I'd love to be an educator. I'd love to be teaching photography. If there's a chance of being a master, that would be, the cream. Thank you very much. And the next thing was we all got invited to join this cohort based on building a photography business. So in Sphere 2, as you know, I'm just saying this now really for the viewers to be quiet, Mason, we got people learning how to make books, doing websites. For me, it's running a business with regards to setting up workshops for the future and getting to work around those. So it's a really pure business orientated. Now, in terms of the photography, there's no photography for me to present to levels for critique sessions, which is where, in actual fact, I've come off the rails a little bit because I'm not taking as many photographs as I was in Sphere 0 and 1. But that's by the by, because I'm doing a lot of work on the routes that I'm bedding down for the future is very, very valuable. So it's interesting how you've, in actual fact, developed your spheres and through, and here's to Sphere 4.
Yes. It's hard for me to even imagine Sphere 4 at this point, but
you see, the whole thing is I can't see this Arcanum is not going to stop. It's just basically a case of, there's loads of learning curves which we've all experienced. The website is just getting bigger and bigger and running more fluidly, and this promotion is probably something which has got to be worked on. But thanks for discussing that through with me with the Arcanum, amazing, because I bumped into a couple of guys recently and they've all said, what is the Arcanum? And hopefully they'll either watch it live now or they'll pick it up on YouTube later.
Hopefully we've cleared the waters just a little.
The waters. It's not as muddy as it was before. It's just a little bit milky, And what I'd like to do, Mason, is let's go straight to let's see some of your work, do a screen share. And for the viewers, I'm just going to the screen share option here. And as always, I'll just be scrolling through Mason's work. And Mason, you just shout out when you want me to stop at any particular images. But hey, look at this stuff coming up here. This is fantastic landscape work. It's a wow. You look at it, it's superb. Tell me about this guy here, the helicopter pilot.
The helicopter pilot. Well, that's actually a very important person to me. That's my brother-in-law.
All right, okay.
Yeah, he is. We've actually been friends for a very long time, and I'm married to his sister, right, which helps. And I met her through him, and he's now a helicopter pilot with the Coast Guard. And every chance I get, I photograph him because I find not only do I find his work incredibly compelling, but I think he's incredibly handsome, and so I don't mind photographing him, and he's game. He's always happy to pose for me. And so when I was down in Northern California last summer, we went by the hangar and got a helicopter out and posed. So.
And I bet he's got some stories to tell over a few beers.
He does. He's an amazing guy. Really incredible guy. Proud to know him. That's my son Cooper there.
Cooper,
yeah, he's always good for a few photos as well.
Lovely. A little bit of street photography there, or urban, probably.
A little bit of urban. I trying to do more street. I don't have a lot in the portfolio, but I've been shooting a lot more people and a lot more street over the last year. I like to stop at the owl photo. You're getting down to it there.
Come down. Look at the clarity on that. Let's get the geeky bit out of the way first of all.
Sure.
Camera, lens.
For the owl,
yes.
Yeah. For the owl shot, it was a Canon 5D Mark III.
Okay.
With the 70-200 lens, f2 Mark II. Probably, I'm not sure right offhand. It might have had an extender on it.
Mhm.
But this is at our local zoo here in Portland, and this is a owl that's perched on a person's arm.
Oh, right. Okay.
She was walking around with this owl to show the kids and things, and it was a very quiet day at the zoo, and so we stopped and I photograph at the zoo quite a bit, and so I really enjoy it. I always carry a camera. We stopped and I was able to zoom in on this animal. The thing that really got to me about this owl is it was blind. And to me, I found that incredibly sad that an owl, you know, an animal that's known for its visual acuity, was blind. And so I was almost emotional about this little bird, but I found it to be so regal. And I shot it, you know, with the long lens, compressed it, knocked that background out. With the shallow depth of field, and I just loved how it came out. Really happy with it.
Really happy with that. My dog is blind, so she caught glaucoma a couple of years ago. So it's amazing how an animal gets used to the handicap. But as you say, an owl blind, that's quite something. So I love the photograph here on the left of the beetle.
Yeah, that's a more recent one. That is taken with my new camera setup, the Sony Alpha 7 Mark II, Alpha 7R Mark II, with a Canon 100 to 400 Mark II with an adapter, of course.
Okay. Now, does that lens work off the camera manually, or does it work through automatically? Can you autofocus with it?
It'll autofocus pretty well. The 100 to 400 does better than the 70 to 200.
Okay.
I'm really excited about Sony's new 70 to 200 2.8 that'll come out in May.
Right.
That will replace both of these lenses for me. So I'll be getting rid of both of my Canon white lenses and getting.
I think it's one of the things about Sony. They really sort of set the standard with regards to the camera bodies, but up until sort of now, the lens stable hasn't been, shall we say, up to anywhere near what Nikon and Canon have got for obvious reasons. But it's nice to see they're bringing out some good quality glass now.
Yeah, very exciting. Very exciting.
Nice shot of the Golden Gate Bridge there.
Thank you. The church shot there is one row down there is. That's actually a 3-shot stitched panorama made with the 5D Mark III and my 24 tilt and shift lens, Canon tilt and shift.
Okay, yeah.
And this is a painted church on the Big Island of Hawaii.
Yep.
I really enjoy doing panoramas, and now that I've moved over to the Sony camera, I'm not using the tilt and shift lens. I'm using a panorama rig from Really Right Stuff, a gimbal. And so I've been using Zeiss Batis lenses and the gimbal rig, and I'm working on some new megapixel high resolution panoramas. Really excited about it.
And with this particular one, it was stitched in what, in Photoshop?
Yeah, that one was. Sometimes I do it right in Lightroom, just let Lightroom do it, but that one I worked on in Photoshop.
Yeah. One of the so tell me about this portrait here of this fellow on the right.
That is a really interesting guy named Ben Moon, who is a fellow Portlander and photographer and filmmaker. And people may recognize the name. He made a film last year called Denali, which was about his dog that he had for years and years who had passed away. And it's on Vimeo. If you just search for Denali, you'll see it. It's got millions of views. Ben is a very, very gifted photographer and filmmaker, but he's also an incredible outdoorsman. And I'm not afraid to say that I've got a mad crush on this guy. And I had a chance to meet him at a Sony event last summer when I was there to review the new camera, the A7R Mark II. And I asked for him to stand for a portrait. And he does a whole series of portraits that are very similar to this, of famous mountaineers and rock climbers. And so I wanted to pay homage to him and shoot him in that style. And so I used the A7R Mark II and the Sony 90 macro lens.
Yeah. Staring right down the barrel, isn't he?
Yeah. I tussled his hair down there. It was out of his face, and I actually
made him look a bit.
just
Yeah,
do what you want. And I brushed his hair down, and I turned out a lot better.
yeah, exactly right. You don't want to look. He's got a face that doesn't want to look too smart. You want him to look a bit rough. Lovely shot there of the cub playing with the tail. Super.
Yeah, that's another zoo shot. We're very fortunate here in Portland to have a zoo that has had several sets of lion cubs over the last few years. And so the big lion that's up on the rock is the older sister to the younger one. And so they're very fun to watch. Now they're all full grown, and the enclosure is quite full of lions now. I think they're going to have to get rid of some. Have to send them off to other zoos, but they've pretty well destroyed the place.
When you watch these cubs, they're playing, and of course they're playing because they're interacting and they're getting to know this is how we will be tussling for food, which is their ingrained knowledge, isn't it? And he's practicing there on the tail. Just want to talk about this dance photograph in here, jumping out of the water, because I see a lot of dance photographs, and it's one of the things which I find a dead static shot of a dancer doesn't do it for me. There's got to be some form of movement in the image, even if it's some blur, it doesn't matter. But this one, you've used the water, which gives that. We know water droplets can't possibly stay in the air like that, so we know they're moving. Yeah. Is this a commercial shot you had to do, or just for fun?
No, it's actually, it was taken at the same time as the Ben Moon shot up above. It was during the Sony A7R Mark II launch event, and Sony had brought a lot of bloggers and writers together to show off the new camera. And they gave us all cameras and lenses, and they took us out to different places, and they wined and dined us for a couple of days. And one of the things they did on the last day was they had set up this warehouse full of boxers and mixed martial art fighters, clowns, skateboarders, and they built a skateboarding ramp, and they had all this stuff. And they had a set of 4 breakdancers, and the breakdancers would do their thing over on the skateboard ramp. And there was a mural behind them, and it was really fun to shoot them over there. And they had the boxers and the mixed martial artists over in this water tray. They had built this about, I don't guess it's probably 3 inches deep of water, and they had it backlit with those giant cinema lights back there. And it's purpose made to show off the focusing ability of the camera, right? And so I was shooting with, I believe this shot is with the 35 millimeter Sony 35 1.4 and the A7R Mark II. And I just let the autofocus track to see if it would do it. And I was shooting the mixed martial artist guys, and they were kicking a lot of water around, and the water was really fooling the camera. But it was working quite a bit of the time, and I was really interested to see if we could do some more. And the boxers and the fighters got done, and the breakdancers were standing around. And I said, "Hey guys, do you want to go play in the water?" And they said, "I don't know if we can." And so I went to the organizer of the event, the guy from Sony. I said, "Hey, can the breakdancers come over and jump around in the water?" And they're like, "Oh, hell yeah, let's do it."
Yeah. And
so it became the highlight of the week, or the couple of days for a lot of us. We got our best shots when these guys were doing flips, and this guy is actually doing a standing flip. And I don't know how many shots I made of this guy. His name is Oscar. We've actually stayed in touch. He's here in Portland. This was here in Portland. And amazing guy. He could incredible vertical leap, and he'd jump and do a flip and then land back down in the water. And I nailed this shot. The focus just happened to work, right? I was just letting the camera do its thing, and really happy with how it came out. Really
so we got the backlit from those light boxes on the back there. What's from the front to
big Fresnel lights. They just had really hot lights pointed at this stage area. So the lighting was actually really pretty harsh. Certainly not what I would probably choose for that. You can see the pretty harsh shadow of his hand on his
well, that's side. What I was going to point to, actually, because if anything, out of the whole image, I love the water, obviously from the foot down to the to the surface, but the hand shadow on the side of the torso there sort of makes the shot for me, to be honest with you.
It does. I like it. The thing that bothers me about this shot and bothered me about the shoot in general was they had the lights, the front lights aimed low, because it was guys standing in the water boxing.
Yeah.
And so he's actually up out of the field of light somewhat. And, that you can see that bright hit on his side with the hand shadow. That's pretty much the top of that pool of light. And his face and his chest have come up into the shadow area a little bit.
Yeah.
And it worked out, but it was tough.
Hand on heart, how much editing did you have to do with this image once you got it into Lightroom?
Not a lot. It was a horizontal. I cropped it to a vertical just to eliminate a lot of unnecessary subject matter.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of cabling above that bar you see in the background.
Yeah.
I edited out. Otherwise, the rest of it is pretty much straight out of camera.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the great thing about that Sony is it's got so many pixels. You can crop to a vertical and have plenty to work with.
There's some lovely shots here.
Thank you.
Just trying to find one to finish off on.
Sure.
Which let's talk about the lovely little girl here.
This is a girl that goes to a school where my son attends, a little preschool.
Yeah.
And her name is Una. She's really a sweetheart. I was asked by the leaders of the school. It's a very small little school in our neighborhood. And they knew I was a photographer. They said, "Would you do our school pictures?" I said, "I've never really done anything like that, but I would love to." And so I went in and set up a little studio in the classroom and did the individual kid shots. And I did normal serious ones. And then I asked him to be goofy for one. And you saw the one of my son further up the stack. This is one of her. And when I saw it in Lightroom, I said, wow, it's just really, this is a great face. And she's really lovely girl with that great hair. And she grabbed her skirt and brought it up, and she had those cute little fingers. And I made it into a black and white and put a pretty heavy vignette on it. Yeah. Really happy with how it turned out.
Perfect. I was going to say you've added the vignette in the editing process. It's worked out perfectly. She looks a little bit of a tinker to me, Mason, I think.
Yeah.
A little bit of a tinker. I think we'll stop on that one. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing the images and talking about them. It's I love hearing about how the photographer has been thinking about the process and what they're looking to achieve. And so thank you for that. Interesting enough, you talked quite a bit there about the Sony and the gear that you've now moved to, but there was a little bit of I don't know whether you're still using, but there was dare I use the term of flirtation with the Fuji?
Yes.
Have you still used that?
I don't. I did have a Fuji X-T1. At one point I had two, and I also had an X100S. When I picked up the Sony gear, I found myself using the Fuji less and less. And so I sold it off to friends, actually, a lot of it, because it's probably, and it still is, the system I recommend the most to people who ask me, what kind of camera should I buy? My default is always, depending on what they're doing, but I say, look at the Fuji system because it's magnificent. For me, the Sony A7R Mark II, there's a lot of problems with that camera. The battery life is horrible, things like that. Yeah. But man, image quality I just couldn't get that type of image quality from the Fuji. If I was more of a street and people shooter, I probably would buy the X Pro 2. Yeah. In fact, I'm still thinking about it because I do love the street. I still have a Zeiss lens I haven't sold off yet. Zeiss 2-it 12 millimeter lens that I love. But the Fuji system is beautiful.
It certainly is, and I'm quite honest with you. You look at these mirrorless cameras now, which have come out. They've really pushed the boundaries. They're coming out with the innovation. Looking at the new Olympus pen that's come out, that Pen F looks just an awesome camera. And I'm not wholly 100% convinced on Micro Four Thirds, but hey, that's just the way you are. I'm a Fuji user, and I can honestly say, moving from Nikon as you guys call it, to Fuji, it was the best thing that I did. Fuji brought photography back to me. They were just a joy to use. And I've got three Fujis: the X100S, the XE1, which is the first camera I bought, which I've converted to an infrared.
Cool.
I bought the XT10. And I've just got the two lenses for the interchangeable 35-1.4 and the 1855 kit. So
Really? Oh, wow.
that's my gear, and really, as I say, Fuji brought photography back to me. I was getting a little bit in the doldrums with the Nikon gear. Sorry, Nikon. I think you got to step up to the plate still, but I've been saying it
Yeah.
for months, and we'll leave that at that one. That's a neat little segue because I normally start the show off. What was the first camera that you can ever experience, recollect in your household when you were a kid?
Yeah, I can remember very clearly. I had it was my mom's camera. It was a Kodak 110 camera. You remember these? They
Yes, I
looked
do.
flat, plastic box with a horrible little sliding
Yeah,
winding mechanism, and you'd put a cartridge of 110 film in there
that's right.
and shoot your 24 shots and take it off. Um, really horrible camera, but that was my first camera, and I sort of stole it from my mom. She didn't use it much, and I ended up burning a lot of film through that, and I decided that I wanted a real camera with a real lens. And at the time, we're talking about the early 1980s. Okay.
Right, okay.
So way back at the time, I had a Commodore 64 computer that I had bought.
Okay.
And I'd worked a lot of weekends and things, and saved up a lot of lawn mowing money and bought this Commodore 64, completely bored with the idea of a computer once I used it. But I had a friend who had a Canon AE1 camera and a 50 millimeter 1.8 lens, and he wasn't using it, and he wanted a Commodore 64, so we traded. And I got to say, that was the best deal I ever did.
It was a good trade.
It's a good trade. And I'm pretty sure he didn't get any use of that Commodore 64.
Yeah.
But man, the Canon AE1, I about wore that out, and then I eventually moved up to a Canon A1.
Okay.
And in high school, I was the editor of our high school newspaper, and also did a lot of the photography. And when I went to college, I studied journalism, got a degree in journalism, and did all of the newspaper photography and yearbook photography and publications department photography for the college.
That's great, because interestingly, last week I was talking to AD Wheeler, and I thought I was going to get very similar to what you've just told me, a history of photography from a kid through to school. And he went, no, I picked a camera up in 2008. And I thought, oh, this is a totally different story. So it's fantastic. And really, from my first camera was a Kodak 110.
Yeah.
And that's the camera that I took to the Monaco Grand Prix in 1976.
Oh my gosh.
and I took photographs of Clay Regazzoni, Nicky Lauda, and all the six-wheel Tyrrells going past. Didn't miss a shot. Perfectly. But yeah, I took a Kodak Instamatic 110 to the Grand Prix. It was so funny.
Oh, that's hilarious.
My first camera was the Zenit E, the Russian brick, as I call it, with the 55 mil Helios lens. It was, awesome. But anyway, that's how I started off. So it's interesting that you followed photography right the way through schooling. You were interested, you got into journalism. Did you go into journalism when you left high school?
I did. I worked after college. I worked as a graduate with a bachelor's in journalism.
Yeah.
And worked as a stringer for the Associated Press and for the Spokesman Review, which is a big daily newspaper in my hometown of Spokane, Washington. And did a lot of starving for a year. As a stringer, you make like $30 a day. It's really horrible work. And you get the worst assignments, the stuff that nobody else wants. And I think that's exactly what somebody from college, straight out of college, needs to do. You need to grovel. You need to shoot for papers you really don't want to tell anybody you shot for. I shot for the National Enquirer. I shot for the Globe. I shot for some really raggy papers because it paid for the rent.
Yeah.
Eventually, I got a job as a newspaper photographer up in Alaska. My first real job out of college. I took a job over the phone and moved to Alaska and worked as the sole photographer for a daily newspaper for 3 years up there. And I had a blast. It was an absolutely wonderful experience. Learned so much. And I had a photo on the front page of the paper every single day for 3 years. And it was really exciting. And I was spoiled there because I got to cover everything. I was I was the only one. And so news, sports, features, you name it, I got to play with it, and I really enjoyed the work. But Alaska was a very difficult place to work. It's dark a lot of the year, and cold and miserable. And I missed my family. I missed the lower 48. And so I took another newspaper job down on the Oregon coast at a daily, and worked down there for about 2 years. And that was a much less professional newspaper. It was a bigger operation, but it was a much tougher place to work. And it was supposed to have 2 staff photographers, and one of them left right after I got there. About 4 months after I arrived, he got a job somewhere else, and they couldn't fill the position. So I was the sole photographer for over a year, and I just burnt out. I worked way too hard, and stayed up all overnight too many times, and covered some really horrible stories, and just got really emotionally wrung out and burnt out. And I did a feature story on a historic tall ship that came to town as it was traveling up the coast. And one of the things I always used to tell people when I was a newspaper photographer, because you go and you do a lot of talks at schools, they get invited to speak a lot. When you're a photojournalist, people think it's romantic, I guess. And they'd always say, what's the best part of your job? And I'd say, well, the best part of my job is I get to test drive everybody else's job. And every day I would go and meet new people and see what they did for a living, or see what they did for fun. And I always told myself, if I can find some people that have better stories than me, I'm going to go do that. And this tall ship came into town, and they were the most fascinating people, the crew of this boat. And they said, yeah, man, you should come join us for a couple weeks. And so I took some time off and traveled up the coast with them, and fell in love with sailing. I'd never sailed before. Fell in love with the history. It was all about the historical replica. And so it was all about history and education and teaching school kids. And so I quit my job and joined the boat as an education director and communications director, and did that for almost 3 years, and lived on a boat with 12 other people for a long time, and went up and down the U.S. West Coast teaching school kids and the general public about nautical history and about navigation and all of that. And
so the ship would be sailing up and down the coast there. You'd be pulling in the port. The kids would come onto the ship, and you'd be teaching.
Wow. Yeah, we'd set up school field trips, and so we'd take them out for 3 hours on the sail, and they would work the sails. We'd teach them about what it was like to be a trader 200 years ago. Teach them about the local history, the nautical history along the coast. It was really fascinating, really fun work. I mean, it really was a celebrity lifestyle. You'd roll into town, and you had cannons. We shot cannons at people. The ship was absolutely stunning. It's called the Lady Washington, and been in a lot of movies, been in a lot of TV shows and things. And so we were, celebrities, but we're really just bums. I mean, we didn't make any money, and you lived in the bottom of the boat for 3 years like that. But I didn't do a lot of photography on the boat.
I was just going to ask you during that, what about the photography? What happened?
Well, I had all my gear with me. Right. But I found that, obviously when you're on a historical replica and you're a crew member, we were dressed in authentic costumes. It wouldn't work to have a camera.
No.
And so I was pretty burnt out, but I would shoot occasionally when we were transiting from port to port. I would bring the camera out, and I photographed in the towns we'd go to. I'd go and walk around and do street photography and things. Yeah. But it took me probably those full 3 years to just sort of purge my system of the.
Yeah, I was going to say, you said that in journalism, you basically, to a degree, burnt yourself out with that work. So obviously, this period of 3 or 4 years on the ship, sailing, educating youngsters, doing a little bit of photography, bleeding yourself back into your true love of life, so to speak. Apart from your wife and family and kids, obviously.
Yeah, that came a lot later, but the truth is that on that ship, what I really discovered was that a part of photojournalism that I really loved was education.
Yes.
And people would often, another thing that people would ask me is, what do you see the role of a newspaper photographer being? I say, well, while you're at work, I go and see what's going on, and then I show you.
Mm.
And that's education, really.
Yeah.
And so when I found that when I moved onto the ship and began teaching more formally, and working with other teachers, professional educators, I found that I had a knack for it, because I think that was one of the things that drew me to journalism in the first place, was the sharing of stories with other people and the sharing of information. And when I got off the boat and went home to move to Seattle, I went to work in an aerospace museum. So I went from kind of 200-year-old nautical history to space travel and airplanes. And I worked in an aerospace museum as an educator, designing education programs for them and running them. And then I eventually moved on to another museum in Wisconsin and did the same thing. And really, as much as the subject matter was wildly different, there was really no difference for me. It was about sharing concepts and ideas with adults and kids, people of all ages. Experiential education. Airplanes are very tactile, and getting people excited about things, and then sneaking science and math in there too is really great. And so I found that education was sort of my juice. That was the thing that got me up in the morning. I really love it. I do. I've been an educator almost as long as I've been a photographer. And it's just been really the last 7 or 8 years that I've been able to merge the two back together. And
that's merged now with your workshops and your work with the organic.
Yeah. I was doing a lot more workshops. I used to do a lot more. But and now I have a family. We're settled down. I've been in one place for 10 years now, which is a record for me. Getting back into photography with the advent of digital photography was really fun to watch from the outside. I still dabbled in photography. I had little point and shoot digital cameras when they first started coming out and all that, but I did not invest in DSLR size or full size digital cameras until the 5D Mark II came out.
Really? So they're quite a way into the start of digital photography.
Yeah, I just didn't see the quality.
I've heard that a lot. I've heard a lot of people say that.
Yeah, it really seemed like a huge compromise to me. I shot with some of the early 1DX cameras, or 1D cameras, I guess they were S. I don't remember what they were. Rented a few of the big SLRs, and they felt familiar because I was used to the Canon EOS 1 film camera. But the quality of the images, I felt like it was a lot of work for a little bit of very little return. And when the 5D Mark II came out and I saw the images from it and the video it produced, I said, okay, now I can jump in. And I did, and I haven't looked back. Digital photography is incredible, and I often tell people who are new to photography, who've only done digital photography, and who romanticize film. There's a lot of people out there like, oh man, I just love film. I'm like, you don't love film when you have to soup it every day, when you have to go into that darkroom every single day, day after day after day, and process film. The idea that I could sit in a coffee shop and have a coffee and process photos and send them somewhere without having to drive hours and hours to a darkroom and do all that manual labor. We live in a gilded age. It's fascinating technology. It's absolutely
I was watching a politician came out of his house a couple of weeks ago, because you probably heard we've got this referendum coming up in June, whether we decide to be part of the EU or not. And Boris Johnson came out of his house, and there's all these photographers around. And I said to my wife, I said, watch the photographers. And they're shooting off the shots. And then, of course, they're going straight to the back of the screen while he's turned the other way. And, of course, what they're doing, they're Wi-Fiing the shot straight off to the editing booth, so to speak. it hasn't even touched the computer. That's the amazing thing about it these days, isn't it?
It is. You go right through your phone.
Yeah.
It is incredible. I don't know how many basketball games I had to leave at halftime to make a deadline.
Yeah.
And the best part of the game I missed.
Yeah, exactly.
As a photojournalist, you're like, why? Why am I? I'm sacrificing the. Hope. I always say I gotta hope nothing big happens while I'm gone, processing my film. And now, I literally could be shooting a basketball game and having the photos go through my phone that's in my pocket back to an editor. And it blows my mind. And I sit in awe of this technology.
Yeah, it's just truly amazing that it's gone.
And when people complain about it, I get furious because I'm like,
you can't complain about it because it is advancement in technology. I still use a film camera from time to time, and I do but I'm a hybrid film photographer. I get the film processed for me. I'll bring them. They're on CD, put them straight into my computer, and I use Lightroom. So, and I print them off on a quality paper. But I suppose it's the what's the word I'm looking for? The tradition of using a camera and the glamour of using a film camera for a short period of time, just to use something basic for a change rather than having all that work done. Let's talk about this. This question always stumps a lot of my guests. The favorite photographer. Whose work are you enjoying at the moment, Mason?
Oh man, that's a lot harder question to answer now than it used to be.
Yeah.
Because we have access to so many great photographers now. There are a few photographers I really look at and I'm in awe of them. Both their work that they produce and how they do it. One is David Duchemin.
Yes.
Who's out of Canada. He's a fabulous photographer, but for me, it's his ethic that I just adore. I really, if I could be a photographer, I want to be like him.
Yeah.
Martin Bailey's another one. It was such a pleasure to be able to interact with Martin a little bit when I started at the Arcanum.
Mm-hmm.
Always been a fan of his. Going way back, and I still follow these people, but people like Art Wolf.
Yes.
For landscapes. Galen Rowell was an inspiration to me when I was, very, very early in my photography career. And I still look at his work and it's, so sad that he didn't get a chance to shoot with digital because he would have loved it. Of course, everybody says stuff like Ansel Adams. I don't really get Ansel Adams. I mean, I get it, but I don't get it. Maybe because it's been done, but
yeah, I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I think his work's amazing, and the way he set up, and of course we got to bear in mind, of course, he wasn't using a 35mm camera. It was 10x8, wasn't it? It was a large format. He was very, very clever in the darkroom. I actually remember seeing a video of him once, and he was using a microwave to dry his print off.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he rolled up the test print. He rolled it up and put it in the microwave, and it had just dried it in seconds. And he was looking at it. I thought, wow, But he would have. Well, yeah. I'd love to have seen the work he could have produced using digital cameras, and that's the thing. Yeah.
He would embrace it fully for sure.
Oh, he would have done. He would have done without a shadow of doubt.
I think that there's a lot of photojournalists over the years that were inspirational to me, that still are. People that I worked with in newspapers, that no one would recognize their names, But honestly, I have to say, and I'm not being cheeky here, but I really find a lot of inspiration from the photographs of my apprentices in the Arcanum. Yeah,
it's interesting you say that, because obviously that was going to be my next question, inspiration. And there, to be honest with you, a lot of the masters that I speak to from the Arcanum, the same thing, and I don't think it's a case of wanting to sound cheesy or trying to sort of soap up to people, but I can totally understand what you're saying, because the work that you actually see going through the Arcanum by the apprentices, some of it is just, it makes you think, it's different, and some of it is just damn good.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good. I have many apprentices who are better than I am, and I'm okay with that. I'm great with that.
Yeah.
you know, they're the people like Bruce Rosensteel and Stephen A. Wolf and Nick Nieto. These are all apprentices and now friends of mine. Um, you know, I follow them on social media, not because they're friends, but because I love their photos.
Yeah.
You know, I want to see what they're doing. I want to see what they're, you know, what creative juices they've got flowing. Um, you know, fellow masters like A.D. Wheeler, you know, I enjoy his work a lot. His style is quite a bit different from mine, but I really appreciate his ethic. You know, I just really, it's such a river of great stuff.
It is.
That flows by. It's hard for me to pluck out, you know, droplets for you, but there, I will say too that for me, the more I look at photographs, the more I find my inspiration coming from outside of photography.
Oh, okay.
And this is, you know, things that are starting to move me now are, you know, people who are creative, who don't do photographs, like writers, you know, and musicians. And, you know, I watch a video of a musician practicing their craft, and I'm inspired to work harder, because I'm going to upset some people when I say this, Paul, but good photography is actually pretty damn easy. Because of the technology, I mean, we can take really good shots. I have my photographs up on my screen here, and I go, well, I mean, I did okay, but you know, I go back to music. I mentioned this earlier on in the show. I couldn't pick up a guitar and make it sound good.
No.
But I think anybody can pick up a modern camera and get a decent shot. So
I think that's the point you make there. I think it's a good point. You say a decent shot, and I think that's where you got to draw the line. It's a decent shot. It's when you see some work that in a photograph which really moves you. That's when you know that photography is on the next level. For me, it's Soul Lighter. Every single time I pick his books up, whether it's the color versions or the monos, I'm just going, wow, every time I turn the page over. And it's interestingly enough, last night I was out with a friend who is a guitarist. He's not a professional guitarist, but he teaches some old pals to play the guitar. And I've watched him on YouTube, and he's damn good. But interestingly enough, and there's a guy also who plays golf, they practice. They practice their hobby on a regular basis, and that is how they improve, and that's how they get their enjoyment.
Yeah, I tell this story quite a bit, but I love it. When I was a newspaper photographer in Alaska, we used to get quite big musical acts that would be on their way to Japan, and they would stop in Alaska and do a couple shows. And the town that I was in was close enough to Anchorage that we would get a show every now and then. And we had George Winston come and play at our high school auditorium, which is this huge, beautiful auditorium. And whenever there was a big show that I was going to photograph, I'd always try to get there early so I could kind of see how they'd set up the lights and check out different positions, and sort of just, I always like to arrive early, and I still do this even with my landscape and my street photography. I like to just sit and just soak up the place, you know, get the energy going. And I showed up early, and they said, "Oh, you can't go in." I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, George Winston's in there practicing." And I'm like, "He's practicing?" And they go, "Yeah, it's in his rider that for 2 hours before every concert, nobody can go in the auditorium, so he can just sit and practice. It's not a sound check. It's not, you know, a time for it. It's just him to practice." And it made me realize that even if you're the best, that doesn't mean it just came easy to you, right? I mean, the people who are the best are the ones who busted their ass on it. And, you know, they have that talk about 10,000 hours, right? It takes 10,000 hours to be good at something. When you reach that 10,000 hour point, that doesn't mean you get to sit back and go, I'm here.
Yeah, I've done it.
You know, you got to do another 30 or 40,000 hours to keep it.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I feel like that way with photography, and I really struggle. There's certain times a year where my creativity and my energy drops. You know, the sun isn't out as much, it's rainy or whatever. Or in the summer when it gets super hot, I don't want to be out. You know, I get these times a year where it's really hard for me to be inspired to go out and work. And so I don't, and my camera sits for days and weeks sometimes without me using it. And I always feel guilty because I know That's my craft slipping away, and I've got to get back at it. And when we're done talking here today, I'm going to drive down to the South Oregon coast. I get 2 days to make photos, and it's going to be stormy, and I'm so excited because I get to go and actually make some photographs, and I haven't done that in weeks.
Yeah, well, it's funny you should say that, because I'm doing exactly the same thing. Tomorrow morning about 10 o'clock, I'm setting off down to the southwest coast in Cornwall.
Oh, cool.
My son, we're going to have a weekend down there, and I got the camera bag ready. It's all the gear that I want to take down there, keeping it nice and simple. I am taking a camera bag, guys, believe it or not. And yeah, we're gonna do that. So yeah, that's great that we can actually do that. I'm just looking at the timing. We just clicked over an hour and 10 minutes, which is great. Mason, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure, an absolute joy to listen to you talking about. We talked a lot about the Arcanum, and thanks for spending that time there, because I think it's important that we get the good word out about it and start doing some more marketing for it, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. And again, talking about your career and your photographs, fantastic portfolio there. So Mason, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And the viewers probably don't realize he's been suffering from a little bit of a sore throat and a cough, and thank you so much for sticking through it. That whatever you're drinking there has obviously worked its wonder. 2
cups of tea, and I'm amazed it held out. So
I thought there might have been a scotch in there or something, just to give it a little bit of listen up.
No, I have to drive for about 6 hours, so I'm gonna go over today.
Anyway, thank you so much again for joining me, and I hope, viewers, you've really enjoyed it. We've had some live viewers as well, which has been great. And for those that watch it on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this interview, this chat. Really, it hasn't been an interview; it's been a great chat with Mason Marsh from the Arcanum. And thanks again. Suffice for me to say, yes, I am taking the camera bag out this weekend, but I'm going to leave my show as I always do, guys. If you're going out shooting, leave your camera bag at home. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.
Thank you.